The story began in 7th grade on the playground after school. We got together to play softball. It was the 4th inning, and I was on first when Norm Snyder hit a single to center. I went to second and saw Harry Sort pick up the ball and throw it to Phil Reed, who was playing second base. I saw the ball was going to be close, so I slid to second base, and when Phil tried to tag me, he moved toward me, and my slide took the ground out from under him. When he fell, I saw the ball fall and roll towards right field. I stood up and ran to third, barely making the throw. 2 innings later, Phil was on second, when Billy Newbert hit up the middle, and when Phil saw that Mike Liss wouldn't make it in time, he rushed me to third, and although the throw was thrown toward the goal line to keep him to score, Phil slid into third, raising his legs high, intent on tripping me. I moved to the side, but then Phil deliberately turned to the side to hit me. I saw him coming, so I pulled my legs up and fell on Phil, hitting him in the stomach with one knee and his crotch with the other. From that day on, Phil and I weren't even close friends. From that day on, Phil always tried to take revenge on me in one way or another. A month later on Halloween, he cleaned the windows of my dad's car and toilet paper the tree in front of our house. But my dad caught him and made him clean up after himself while I sat on the porch and laughed at him. We would go to basketball games, and every practice game, Phil would stand on the other side and foul me every chance he got. The coaches caught on, and as a result, he didn't make the team as a starter, but he sat on the bench where I smiled at him every time I made a basket or blocked a shot. When we went to football, it was the same. He was always on the other side when we were in the scrum, and we had a lot of clashes. He took some good hits, but knowing him like I did, I knew what he was likely to do, and was usually ready for them and got a few hits my way. The coaches saw it, but unlike the basketball coaches, they thought it was good aggressive behavior and allowed it to continue. We both made the team, Phil on defense and I on offense, but I did get a laugh at his expense when we were named co-captains. It was the first time in school history that a team had no captain, and he was hurt that he didn't have the honor alone. Academically, we were about equal. He was slightly better than me in English and history, but I beat him in maths and science. I was not surprised that when I joined the chess club, he followed my example. Whenever we met, he was very tense, but he had no mood for chess, and he could never beat me. But I had to give him credit. I joined the debate team, and he followed me. Every time we came face to face, he beat me when no one else did. Naturally, the hostility spilled over into our social life. If I showed interest in a girl, Phil would chase her too. In this regard, we were about 50-50, although at graduation, I beat him. I knew who I wanted to take, and I knew that as soon as word got out, Phil would be after her too, so I let him know that I was going to invite Nancy Wilde, and of course he immediately went after her. And once Nancy said yes, and Phil was ready, I asked Beverly Holbrook, and she agreed. I had the last laugh about that one. At one of the after-prom parties we attended, Nancy kneed Phil in the groin, called him an asshole, and asked Punky Baggett for a ride home. Bev and I gave each other our cherries and began a relationship that lasted until our sophomore year of college. By then, we both realized that, although we liked each other a lot, we weren't really meant for each other. From the moment I took her to the prom, Phil continued to pester Bev every time he found her alone. She told me about it, and I explained my relationship with Phil. Bev said, "I can have a little fun if you don't mind." "What do you mean? He doesn't know that we decided to be just friends." "And what?" "So, next time he pesters me, I'll say yes and go on a date with him. If you're right, he'll brag about stealing me from you, and when he does, I'll shoot him with Lube." And so it happened. Phil found her alone in the student cafeteria, fired his shot, and Bev said, "I think one date won't hurt, as long as you promise that Rob will never find out about it." They dated 4 times, and on the 4th date, after a steamy kiss, Bev gave him a hand massage. Phil reacted as we expected. One night, he took Bev to a party that I wasn't attending, and bragged to several people that he had stolen her from me, and that she was delighted with him. One of the girls who heard him boast asked Bev if it was true. Bev laughed and said, "No, damn it. Rob and I had a fight, and I was dating Phil despite him. Rob found out about Phil's date and told me he didn't want anything to do with me anymore. I'm with Phil only until something better comes along. I doubt Phil can take anyone's girl away. He's a good kisser, but he's a little lacking, if you know what I mean. Lax. One night I took pity on him and gave him a massage with my hands, or perhaps it would be better to say, with my fingers. With your fingers? Bev giggled and held up her thumb and forefinger and made an up and down motion. The other girl laughed, and 24 hours later the story was spread around the area that Phil had lost control of the joystick. This, of course, was not true, and any girl Phil scored points with knew it, as did the guys who shared the showers and locker rooms with him. He was about the same as 90% of us, just average. Did I feel awkward because I was sort of involved in creating the rumors? Not at all. Considering all the crap I was getting from Phil, I didn't feel bad at all. Phil never approached Bev again. Bev and I were still dating, off and on, until one day she told me she had met a guy and thought he might be the one, and I wished her well. During my last 2 years of college, I dated a dozen girls and started relationships with 4 of them before boarding the relationship ship with Pauline French. What remained constant during those 2 years was that Phil tried to woo every girl I dated, but to no avail, at least until Pauline. Pauline and I got on very well, and I started to think we might have something that would last. That's what I thought until I had to leave town for a funeral. I returned a day early and went to Pauline to let her know I was back and see if she wanted to do anything that evening. I arrived just in time to see her get into Phil's Firebird. I followed them to the landing strip lounge and watched them drink and dance, and I parked 2 rows behind them as they engaged in language wrestling. I don't know if it went any further because I left. Point to Phil, but I thought I was still a heat in terms of points. I returned 2 days later when Pauline called and asked why she hadn't heard from me. You were so busy with Phil Reed that I didn't want to bother you. Take care of yourself, Pauline, and I hung up. She did not ignore this, and a day later she caught me in the student bookstore and asked what happened. I told her about coming back early and seeing her with Phil. So what? It was just a date. I explained my relationship with Phil and told her that as soon as she allowed Phil to touch her, she was history. It's not fair, Rob. All we did was a little neck. There was nothing else. That's not what Phil says. See you, Pauline. Of course, Phil needed to ingratiate himself. One day he asked me how Paulina and I were getting along, and I glared at him, as if you don't already know. Hey, Rob, don't talk to me like that. It's not my fault that you can't keep your woman. I gave him a hostile look and walked away from him. Graduation came and Phil finally disappeared from my life. I took a job with XYZ Industries and they transferred me to their office in Chicago. Last I heard from Phil, he moved to Boston to find a job. 5 years passed, and although I dated a lot, I still hadn't met a girl who made me consider a long-term relationship. I've always been interested in cars, not racing or muscle cars or anything like that, but I loved working on them. I bought old cars, brought them to good condition, and then sold them to get money to buy the next one. I put 25% of the selling price into savings, and when I had enough money, I bought a certificate of deposit. I had a pretty comfortable nest for the day when I could find that special lady and get married. I needed a place to work on cars and decided to buy a house with an attached garage. I found a nice 3-bedroom house with an attached 2-car garage that I could afford, took out a 30-year mortgage, and owned the house. So my life consisted of work, dating once or twice a week, and working on my car at the moment. I had one more lesson. Every Wednesday night, I played poker with the 4 guys I worked with. We took turns hosting the game, so once every 5 weeks, the game took place at my house. The host provided drinks, which usually consisted of beer, chips, and snacks. There were never any big winners because all 5 of us were conservative players. I had just celebrated my 5th year with the company when Philip Reed re-entered my life. XYZ bought out the company where Phil worked. His position was eliminated, but he was offered a position in Chicago if he agreed to the move. He decided to move, and fate assigned him to the same unit in which I worked. On his first day of work, he noticed me and approached me, smiling. "Hi, Rob. Good to see you." he said, extending his hand to me. "How are you doing?" A little wary, I took his hand, shook it, and said, "Pretty good. How about you?" "It could be better. I hate being uprooted in Boston and having to move, but you know how it goes. A man must do what a man must do." "Do you two know each other?" asked Frank Corbin. "Hell yes," Phil replied. "We went to elementary school, middle school, high school, and college together." "Great," Frank said. "This will make it much easier for you to get settled. It's always nice to have someone you know around when you start working." I didn't take Phil's greeting and congratulations at face value because I doubted his attitude towards me had changed. However, I didn't worry about it because there was no rivalry between us. We worked in the same unit, but in different departments. He worked in purchasing and I worked in quality control, so we weren't competing for promotions. And I wasn't dating any of the women where I worked, so he couldn't do anything there. In addition, I saw a wedding ring on his hand. I might have to worry about him sticking a nail under one of my tires in the parking lot, but I didn't think that was likely. Since I didn't have to compete, I decided I didn't have any worries. I forgot about poker games. How Phil found out about them, I had no idea, but he did, and he found out that I was a member of the group. He started dropping hints to Dave, Frank, Mel, and Sam about how much he enjoyed playing poker, and eventually Mel mentioned that it could use some new blood in the game. And one night, Mel asked the others if we would mind inviting Phil to join us. I was against it, but kept silent, because everyone else was not against it. From the first evening he joined us, it became clear to me that I was his target. While me and the others played conservatively, Phil was a little reckless. Sometimes he managed to beat me, and of course it was in the cards, no pun intended, that he would be dealt good hands with the same frequency as everyone else. On the fifth night when he played with us, I was the host. As always, before the game started, the guys wanted to look at my latest project. It was a Honda Prelude with a clean interior and an absolutely cherry body. The problems with it included a stalled engine and 4 bald tires. I found the new engine, still in the original crate, on Craigslist.com and picked up 4 new tires from the Goodyear dealer. The tires were already on the car and the engine was on my lift, ready to be installed in the car. "What do you think you can get for it?" Sam asked. "I put $3,600 into it and should be able to get $5.5 for it." Frank said, "Let me know when you're done with her. I'm looking for a good car for my daughter. I'll get the good friend discount, right? I'll give it to you for $5. The game that night was typical. He had good nights, but the night at my house was not one of them. He never won a single hand against me and, as far as I remember, he didn't win a single pot the entire evening. The next day at work, Frank asked me what happened to Phil. He says he likes to play poker, but he doesn't play shit. If I didn't know better, I'd think he was just playing to try to beat you. He was always a little strange back in school. We competed with each other in almost everything. I think he's just trying to get through those days. Nothing special." The next week, the game was at Phil's. We were introduced to Phil's wife, Sherry, and sat down to play while Sherry set out snacks on a long folding table before disappearing. I had a happy evening. I won, on average, 1 out of every 3 hands, and in every hand that I won, Phil stayed with me until the end. When I won again, the guys laughed, and Phil growled, "Damn asshole." By then it was 9:45, and we had a rule. Since we were all working the next day, the game ended at 10 o'clock. We decided to play again. At the end of the game I called, after which Phil laughed and said, "This time I have you in my hands, Rob." Want to make it really interesting? I called your raise, Phil. Just lay down your cards. "What's the matter, Rob? You never left my side before. What's on your mind?" "The car you're working on is against a weekend with my wife." The other guys looked at him dumbfounded as I said, "You must be joking." "No," Frank said, "you are crazy. It should just be a friendly penny game, not a high-stakes casino game. This is between me and Rob, Frank. How about this, Rob? Are you going to retreat?" I looked at him and quickly made 2 decisions. I looked at the guys and said, "That asshole has been a thorn in my ass since 7th grade. I thought that when I graduated from college and moved away, I would be done with him forever. but apparently fate just likes to mess with me. I looked at Phil and said, I accept your bet, but win or lose, this is the last time I play cards with this group while you are in it. I looked at the others and said, sorry guys, but I'm not going to put up with this asshole anymore. I turned to Phil and said, okay, what do you have? He laughed and put down 4 sevens. I shook my head in disgust, threw my hand into the pile and said, you can pick up Geo on Saturday. Geo? I played for Honda Prelude. No, I didn't play. You were playing on, and these are your exact words, the machine you're working on. I finished Prelude last Friday and sold it to Frank for his daughter on Saturday. On Monday, I bought a broken Geo for $100, and yesterday I started taking it apart. You'll need a trailer to pick it up because you definitely can't borrow mine. I got up, told them I would see them at work the next day, and left Phil's house. The next morning, Dave came into my office and said, after you left, we told Phil that he was no longer welcome. The game is at my place next week, and we expect to see you there. Fine. Fine. And Dave? Yes? Thank you. He smiled, waved his hand at me, and left the office. Phil didn't talk to me on Thursday or Friday and didn't come pick up the Geo on Saturday. Sunday morning, I loaded the car onto my trailer, drove to Phil's house, backed into his driveway, and pushed the car off the trailer. When she rolled down the ramps, she ended up in his front yard. I put the documents under the windshield wipers and drove home. I left the trailer on the hook and read the Sunday Classifieds, and by 9 p.m., I had a 1993 Mustang convertible for my next project. I had just started working on the car on Tuesday evening when a car pulled into the driveway, and through the window, I saw Sherry Reed getting out of the car. I pressed the garage door opener, and she walked down the driveway into the garage. She looked at the Mustang, then at me, and said, I came to thank you for my new yard decoration. I can't say that I really like the color. Can a girl have a drink here? If only it's beer. This will do. I closed the garage door and led Sherry into the house and into the living room. I told her to sit down and asked if she wanted a beer glass, and she said a bottle would be just fine. I went to the kitchen, grabbed 2 PBRs, and returned to the living room, handed her one, and then sat down in the chair across from her. She took a sip from her bottle and then said, have you ever heard the saying that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned? Once or twice. Well, it's also true that hell hath no fury like a woman who's completely pissed off. I raised my eyebrows at this, and she said, I was in the kitchen and heard Phil make his last bet with you. I want you to know that if you had won, I would not have honored this bet. I have no idea where Phil got the idea to pull off such a reckless maneuver, or even why he thought he could get away with it. When I asked him about it, he laughed and said, it didn't matter because he knew he beat you. I reminded him that he was sure he beat you when he played 3 trumps, and you wiped his ass. Phil has always been stupid when it comes to me. Why do you say that? I told her the story of my past with her husband. What would you do if you won? Nothing. Phil is the asshole, not me. She looked at me for a few seconds and then asked, are you the kind of man who can help a girl do what she wants? I think it depends on the circumstances. 2 years ago, I caught Phil cheating and filed for divorce. He begged me to give him another chance, but I turned out to be weak in spirit and took him back. I have no proof, but I'm sure he's doing it again with the Red Lobster waitress. It doesn't matter, because it was all over for us when I heard him make the bet. It became clear to me that he did not value me at all. It's all over between us, but he doesn't know it yet. Would you like to help me? What do you mean? I just heard from you that he was always trying to take your girls away from you. How about you take me away from him? Again, what do you mean? She stood up and began to take off her blouse, saying, I'm sure you can guess it yourself. Phil would have to be a stupid idiot to do anything that would jeopardize his marriage to Sherry. She was fantastic. She was insatiable for sex. I don't know if Phil cheated on her or not, but if he did, he was a fool. I took her to my bedroom, and she walked straight to the bed and lay down on it. I did what she wanted, and we had hard sex, and at the pace I was going, I peaked in about 5 minutes. Sherry didn't even have time to reach the top and burst into tears. No, 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 not yet, please, not yet. But when you reach the finish line, there is nothing you can do about it. And she got to work again. Oh yes, indeed, her husband was a fool. When I was ready again, the second round began. Her moans were interspersed with groans as she had me. That's right, she had me. I practically lay there while she did all the work. Having already peaked once and doing almost no work, I lasted a long time, and probably would have lasted even longer if I could just lie there. But I took the initiative into my own hands. When she reached the top, and a few seconds later, I followed her. I fell on the bed next to her, and she rolled onto her side and pressed herself against me. That was amazing, lover. After the third time, she snuggled up to me, buried her head in my shoulder, and in less than a minute she was asleep. I was still thinking about what had just happened when I dozed off. In the morning, I woke up to Sherry caressing me from the waist down. When I opened my eyes, she said, wake up, sleepyhead. We must start the day right." This is how God intended for a man to wake up, I thought, as Sherry worked her magic on me. After a minute or two, she pulled me on top of her and we made slow, easy love until we were both spent, and then showered. Separately, otherwise we would never have gotten out of the house. While she was getting dressed, I asked, "What will you do now?" "Depends on how far you're willing to go with me." "How far do you want me to go?" "Would you like to have a guest in the house for a while?" I don't want to ask the same question over and over again, but what do you mean? "When I return home, he will demand to know where I was all night, and I will tell him that I spent the night with my lover. Then I will tell him that I am leaving him for my lover. I won't say your name, but I'll remind him of how I caught him the first time, and then I'll mention the waitress at Red Lobster and tell him that I've decided that if he can cheat, then so can I, and so can he. It was just bad luck that the guy I cheated on him with was so much better in bed that I decided to move in with him. And guess what? This is true. As an answer, I stood up, went to the chest of drawers, took the house key from the keychain and handed it to her. She smiled and said, "I'll be here when you return home in the evening." "I will be late. It's poker night, and the game is at Dave's." "I'm not worth you missing a poker game?" "Of course you do. But by the time the guys go to work tomorrow, they'll know about my luck, and I'm sure they'll like to find some way to let Phil know what I tell them." "Can you handle this?" "Oh yeah. This is exactly what I want. You should know that guys like to have fun, and next time the game is here, there will be a lot of jokes and clowning about the fact that I bet you on my hand. It will be just a joke, but can you stand it?" "You'd be surprised what I can stand." That evening, I told the guys what happened, and they all laughed, agreeing that Phil deserved it. I asked them if they could somehow tell Phil on Thursday and Friday that his wife had moved in with me, and they told me they would find a way to accidentally miss it. I don't know how they did it, but on Friday at 11, Phil burst into my office and called me a rotten son of a bitch. "What the hell is wrong with you, Phil?" "You know damn well what's wrong." "You and my wife, that's what's wrong." "Hey, Phil, don't talk to me like that," I said, repeating the words he said to me after the deal with Polina. "It's not my fault that you can't keep your woman." He made a movement as if he was going to come across the table to me. I stood up and said, "Do it, Phil. Please do it. Please do it." He stopped, stepped back, and left my office. This happened 3 years ago. Sherry divorced Phil, and Phil couldn't handle the fact that everyone he worked with knew his wife had left him to live with me, so he quit and moved out of state. And Sherry? She still lives with me, only now she lives as my wife, and I am happy to say that she is 7 months pregnant with twins. The guys make fun of her when we play at my house. Last night, Sam asked her if I could put her on my arm, and she said, "I don't mind." And then she paused a little and said, "If only he had a royal flush." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.